Welcome to Sports Spectrum, the sports and faith podcast that brings Jesus back into the conversation. Here's your host, Jason Romano.
This episode of Sports Spectrum's podcast is brought to you by Compassion International. It's $38 a month, tax deductible, and an opportunity for you and I to release a child from poverty. For more information about how you can make a difference in a child's life, visit the website compassion.com/sportsspectrum. Compassion.com/sportsspectrum. Your $38 goes to food, education, medical care, and vocational training. It's all done in Jesus' name to help a child in need. Make a difference in a child's life. Visit compassion.com/sportsspectrum. Pray about it and consider sponsoring a child today. Today on the podcast, we welcome Jay Feely. Jay is a CBS Sports NFL analyst and a former NFL kicker, 14 years in the NFL. His college years were spent kicking for the University of Michigan and the Wolverines. He was a teammate of Tom Brady's and Charles Woodson, member of that 1997 national championship team. And then Jay's journey to the NFL was not an easy one. First couple years, he wasn't even drafted or on a team. He was playing in the Arena League with the Florida Bobcats and Tampa Bay Storm. And then suddenly in 2001, he got his opportunity and he began his career in the NFL with the Atlanta Falcons. He kicked with the Falcons from 2001 to 2004, moved to the Giants in 2005, to the Dolphins in 2007, the Chiefs in 2008, a couple years with the Jets, 4 years with the Arizona Cardinals, and then his final season in 2014 with the Chicago Bears. Jay's a 2005 Pro Bowler and in 2002 led the NFL in field goals made. And did you know that he's only the second kicker ever to be in a broadcast booth calling an NFL game? The first, well, he'll tell you on this podcast. I think it'll surprise you because you might not remember him, the person that he names, as a kicker. So let's get to it. A great conversation here. Lots of fun with Jay Feely, CBS Sports NFL analyst, former NFL kicker, here on Sports Spectrum. Jay, welcome to the show.
Oh, Jason, it's an honor.
It's great to talk to you, Jay, and it's one that I've been waiting a while to have you on and kind of reconnect because our relationship goes back, it's got to be at least 10 years since the old cold pizza first take days when that show, by the way, took a chance on having a kicker be sort of an analyst role for them back in the day. And now look what's happened. Isn't that funny how things work?
It really is. I think it was like 2005 when I was with the Giants and you guys were in New York. And,
yeah.
I came out to the studios and if I remember correctly, I think Skip Bayless wrote a column about kickers and said that kickers weren't athletes. And I kind of sent an email in, I believe it was to Pete McConville.
Yes.
And said, hey, if I'm not an athlete, why doesn't Skip come down to the Meadowlands? I'll kick off to him and we'll figure out if I'm an athlete or not.
And it all took off from there.
Yeah, I think you guys liked it and brought me in and gave me a chance. And, it kind of opened my eyes to something I never really considered and, didn't think that I would go down that path after my career was over. And I actually worked as a financial advisor for a couple of years before I got in the NFL and kind of thought that's what I would do maybe again when I was done. And just saw that God was taking me down a different path and giving me an opportunity to have an impact on people and to continue to talk and share my faith. And, it's been an interesting road for me walking down this path that not a lot of kickers have gone down before.
Yeah. I mean, we were talking beforehand. There's only been one other kicker that's ever served on a broadcast team for football games, college or NFL. Is that correct?
Yeah. Up in the booth as an analyst, Pat Summerall originally was an analyst before he became the play-by-play guy. And people forget that he was a kicker, prior to doing that. And it just hasn't been, an avenue that guys have gone down. I do think that more and more you're seeing kickers that take leadership roles on their teams.
Yeah.
When you go and you look at the captains that the players vote on, that was the single greatest compliment that I could receive from my teammates was to be voted a captain, especially in that kicking position. And when you go and you look at the NFLPA and the number of guys that are voted by their team to represent them as the player rep, the biggest majority that you have are specialists, kickers, punters, and long snappers. And so I think that there's a lot of respect within the locker rooms that doesn't get translated to the everyday fan for that position.
Yeah, I mean, there's a stigma too from the media. Let's just be honest. I know I had it. If I was trying to pitch Jay Feely as a guest for certain shows at ESPN when I was working as a talent booker, there were people that would say, well, he's a kicker. What can he offer? So I have to imagine that stigma is something that you've had to really work hard to overcome.
Well, especially getting into the media and calling games, right? As an analyst, you're up in the booth, you're supposed to be the expert on the game. And the initial reaction is always, well, he's a kicker. What does he know about football?
Yeah.
And so my approach has always been, I have to know the game and do my homework more so than anybody else. So I'm going to be uber prepared for every game. As I'm getting ready for the season right now, I'm going through every offense coordinator, every defensive coordinator, what their philosophies are, what their core beliefs are, what their trees are, who they coached under, and how that impacted them, going back and reading books, understanding the game, the progression of the game, and personnel groupings, you name it, so that when I get out there and I'm an analyst, I have a knowledge base that hopefully is better than everybody on air. That's my desire. That's my goal. And I think coming from the kicking position, it's kind of mandated. I have to go out there each day that I'm on air and prove that I know the game as good or better than anybody else.
Did you have to kind of do that when you were playing too, even though you had your position as a kicker? Did you feel like you had to kind of prove to your teammates and even to guys like Skip and others that you were more than just, a kicker, that you were an athlete, that you were a part of the team?
Well, it's certainly different with the media than it is your teammates. I think the way, and I tell young kickers this all the time, but the way that you prove to your teammates is in the off season. So I always approach the off season workouts as they were more important to me than anybody else. And so I wanted to go out there, and when we ran, I wanted to run harder than anybody else. When we lifted, I wanted to lift harder than anybody else. And I wanted to earn my teammates' respect by the way that I worked out in the off season. I think that holds true with my faith. And a lot of times people don't see the correlation, but I always talk to young kids. God has given you a gift. It's your job to develop that gift to the very best of your ability, to be the very best that you can be, to be the top echelon, and then to go and then to give him credit for your achievements. It's not to be passive and to not seek greatness, but it's to seek greatness for the right reasons. Yeah.
Tell me about that faith that you have. Where was that birthed? Where did that kind of take shape for you?
It really grew when I was at the University of Michigan. I grew up Catholic, went to a Jesuit high school in Tampa, which I loved. The big lasting impact for me from a Jesuit high school, they talk about being men for others, and they have a big community service requirement. So, each year you had to do a certain amount of hours, and it doubled every year. And so by your senior year, you had to do 160 hours to graduate. And, so it got me involved in community service projects. I started working with Muscular Dystrophy Association during the summers. One of my coaches, who actually became my best man, a guy named Robert Wiener, who's a head coach at Plant High School, still does this. He's been doing this for almost 30 years. He takes his players to go be camp counselors at muscular dystrophy camp. So you spend a week serving these kids. And, a lot of times muscular dystrophy is a life sentence. That life expectancy for somebody with Duchenne's is, in the early 20s. And so you're working with these kids who know they're going to die. And you're trying to give them a week where they're free from all the inhibitions of the disease places on them. And there's no greater thing that you can give somebody in life than to help them not think about this death sentence for a week and to bring joy to their life. And so that had a big impact on me and my desire to serve and my desire to have an impact on people. But when I went to the University of Michigan, I found out what it meant to give your life to Christ and to accept Jesus as your personal Savior. And I didn't really know who that was. I actually went there and in my third day of practice, I was supposed to start as a freshman and came in and I tore my quad and my kicking leg and I was done for the year, and when you're a kicker and you can't kick, especially in a college setting, and they spend a scholarship on you, you're kind of ostracized. And so I was off to the side and, sports was my support system. For me, it was there when my parents got divorced. It was always there for me. I made friends because of it. I was good as a result of, being good in sports. Open all kinds of doors to me. And so now at the biggest moment in my career up to that point, it was taken away and I had to find something to fill that void. And, I tried everything. I started going out, partying, drinking, trying to do all these things to fill that void, and nothing did it. And so finally one day, I'll never forget, we were playing Ohio State, and I went inside to our indoor facility, and I still couldn't kick. This is in late November. And I got down on my knees, and I said, God, I don't know if I'm going to be able to kick again. And I was very frustrated. I just said, I want you to have control. And I don't know where you're going to take me, what direction that's going to lead in, if I'll ever kick again. But I know that I want you to have control. And at that moment, the change in me was a peace. Paul talks about that peace that transcends all understanding. Yeah. And my circumstances certainly hadn't changed, but my reaction to those circumstances forever were changed. And I had a peace that stayed with me the rest of my life, the rest of my career. It actually allowed me to play a lot better. It actually allowed me to become a much better kicker because my results didn't dictate who I was or my future so much. And I was able to just say, okay, God, I trust you wherever I'm going. When I got done at Michigan and I didn't get into the NFL right away and I didn't get drafted, and I spent 2 years out still trying to get into the NFL, still doing workouts, even when that my goals didn't come to fruition, I was able to have that peace that Paul talks about. And so that was the biggest change for me, giving my life to Christ, is being able to trust in him and rely on him, even through all the valleys, the peaks and the valleys that you go through in life.
For so many people who have I don't want to call it conversion, but an experience like that, a transforming experience with the Lord that most of us have had, who have a relationship with God, something changes inside of you, but then you have to kind of learn more, and you become hungry, and you need people in your life to show you and to mentor you and to teach you. So what was that like for you? Were there people that you sought out to serve as spiritual mentors for you, if you will?
Yeah, there's a guy named Bruce Dishna who's still at the University of Michigan, who works for Athletes in Action. Mm-hmm. It's a group that's on a lot of college campuses. And, he was great in kind of walking me through what that actually meant, and helping me to understand biblical truths and understand the New Testament and understand Christ's promise to each of us and what was available to us. And, and then I had a roommate named Craig Baker. And he and I had an interesting journey together through 4 years at Michigan. We're still friends to this day, but we lived together, and yet we competed against each other every day. He was a kicker as well, and they alternated between which one of us was starting. And, we went back and forth all through our careers. And to live with a guy, to compete against a guy, but to share faith with him at the same time, to be able to pray together and for each other, I think helped both of us grow so much in our faiths.
So in becoming a Christian and beginning this new walk with the Lord, everything's perfect, right? Nothing bad ever happens, right? And there was never any more trials, right?
That's right. Absolutely.
Obviously, there's trials. So walk me through kind of dealing with some of those, even coming out of college into what wasn't the NFL right away, and you were kicking in the Arena League. You said you were a financial analyst for a few years. Tell me about your faith sustaining you through that and trying to overcome the setbacks or the disappointments, if you will, that come your way.
Well, my senior year at Michigan, we won the national championship, and I was kicking. And then I came back for my fifth year, and I had a really good year. And I thought, the natural progression is, well, I'll get drafted. I'll go to the combine. I'll go play in the NFL now. And I didn't get invited to the combine. I didn't get drafted. I went to a couple of free agent workouts and kicked what I thought was well, and nobody signed me. And so then all of a sudden you're sitting at home, in August, September, and you're sitting there asking yourself, what am I going to do now? Yeah. My dream didn't come true. And so now, it's like, all right, I got to go find something else to do. And I was married at the time. I had got married after my senior year at Michigan, and I went and got a job and started working as a financial advisor and took all my exams and, continued to kick and work out and kind of do both. And got to the point where, okay, something had to give. I had my first child, and I was working full time, and then going and working out and kicking, and it had been 2 years, and that door hadn't opened, and I got to the point where I said, okay, I'll give it one more chance. I'll go to the same combine workout that I've done, the last 2 years, and nothing's happened. I didn't really expect anything at all, and I went out there and kicked well, but didn't kick any differently than I had the 2 years before. And for me, it was almost like God said, okay, I'm going to open the doors now, but I'm going to open them so wide that you have to know that I was the one who did it, not you. I went from 2 years of not being in training camp, not getting a contract offer, nothing, to having 3 or 4 different teams offer me contracts at the same time and getting to pick the team that I wanted to go to. Now, I wasn't getting a signing bonus. I actually signed for no signing bonus in Atlanta, and turned out I had about a $10,000 offer from another team. But I got to pick the right scenario that I thought would help me to win the job, which was to go in against another rookie kicker, and actually happened to be a guy named Jake Arians, which is Bruce Arians' son. Yeah. And so Jake and I went head to head, and I ended up to winning the job and getting to the NFL and kicking, but it was one of those things where it hadn't happened in so long, that you sit back and you're like, I didn't do anything different. I didn't do anything better. God opened those doors and provided me that opportunity. And when you look back after 14 years playing in the NFL, you realize like just how precious that was.
Yeah, and you played for, like you said, 14 years with 7 different teams: the Falcons, the Giants, Dolphins, Chiefs, Jets, Cardinals, and then a tiny little stint with the Bears, which I remember in 2014. Tell me what that life was like as an NFL player. Kicker aside, it doesn't matter the position. You're in an NFL locker room, your team, and obviously the kicking side is hard too, because 7 teams in 14 years means there's a lot of turnover. There's a lot of change. There's a lot of lifestyle changes in terms of being a dad and a husband and family. But tell me what life was like from a faith perspective and how you saw maybe the state of the NFL regarding faith and being able to have that faith encouraged to be able to grow in your walk with the Lord while still being an NFL player.
Well, I never felt in any way persecuted. I didn't ever feel it was hard to walk in your faith while you're in the NFL. In fact, I felt the opposite. You're in a situation that's as high pressure, intense environment as you can ever get. Every day your job is on the line. Every day you could come in and get fired and your dream and your career is over. And then you're going to have to go sell your home and you're going to have to find another job. And, so because of that environment, it really forces people to have something greater than themselves that they can rely on. And I felt it was funny because the closer and closer you got to game day, the more and more people came to Bible studies or chapels or whatever it was. Yeah. I mean, the night before the game, there's half the team in there, going to chapel. Yeah. Because the reality of the pressure of the moment is in your face and it's there every day. I think it's harder, now that I'm out of the NFL, it's harder when you don't have that distinct deadline and pressure every week. Because we just live our life and there's nothing there that forces us to go back to Christ and forces us to rely on him and know that we're not good enough on our own. Right. And every week in the NFL, you had this deadline on Sunday that forced you to go back and to say, God, I need your help. Yeah. I can't do this on my own. The pressure and everything that's contained in this game is too much for me to do by myself. So, and I love being in a locker room. I love being with my teammates and developing those relationships. I was really lucky at the beginning of my career when I went to Atlanta because we had 9 or 10 young couples that were just starting their families, that were just starting their careers, and that were young in their faith. And we all grew together and we all hung out all the time. And I thought that was normal. I'm like, man, this NFL is awesome. You have this big group of Christians that are hanging out all the time, that are growing together. We had couples Bible study at my house all the time and everybody would come over, and then you start going other places and you realize kind of how special that really was and how unique that really was. And, so to begin my career like that and to have this group of men and for my wife to have this group of women that you can rely on, that you can talk to, that you can trust, was just so such a blessing. It really was.
Take me through trying to be a Christian, live out your faith, all of that, which is amazing, the couple studies. But then there's other people who believe different. And that's not just in the football locker room. That's in life. That's at me at ESPN. There's tons of people that believe many different things or don't believe anything at all. So tell me what that was like for you, because we are called to be salt and light. We are called to share our faith and to be open about our faith. But obviously, there are people that believe different. So what was that like for you? Is there any stories or any just, maybe general thoughts on what that was like to kind of share that faith openly within your teammates and in the locker room?
Yeah, I've always been the kind of guy who I'm an open book, and I'm going to say what I think and say what I believe. And hopefully by the way that I live my life, you respect me even if you disagree with me. You know, I'm that way with politics. I'm that way as an analyst on the football field,
Sure.
talking about the game, talking about coaches, decisions, players, etc. So I was that way with my faith, and it was out there. Everyone knew what I believed, why I believed it, had great conversations, would sit in the back of the bus many times with different guys, debating different topics, talking about life, talking about politics, talking about religion. But at the same time, I think that your faith, it can't just be academic. It can't just be you talking about the Bible. It has to be lived out, and so because of the way that I think I tried to live my life and engaging in projects, and as I've gone through going down to Haiti and doing projects and bringing players with me and bringing people that I know with me and going into Mexico and doing projects, I think that my faith has always been kind of real, and I've tried to live it out. And because of that, it's opened doors to talk to people that maybe wouldn't listen otherwise. And so I didn't feel any resentment. Sometimes I felt resentment from management on some teams, and I think that's kind of the totality of, I was the player rep. I did media. I was outspoken about my faith. And again, I was a kicker, and if it's the quarterback and he's leading your team, I think they get a lot of leeway, and as a kicker, sometimes you don't. I mean, I had a head coach tell me one time, I decide who the leaders on this team are, and you're not one of them. I want you to go kick and stand in a corner. And I knew I wasn't going to be on that team for a long time.
I mean, that's just terrible to say to a person, because every player should be considered a leader on their team, right?
Well, it's weird because the year before that, I had led the league in field goal percentage. I kicked really well. I was voted a team captain. I was voted the player rep. I was voted man of the year by the team. So there's all these things, but different coaches have different mentalities, and some of those old school mentalities about kicking, they didn't like that. There was a guy that came up and worked at ESPN with you who did that. So
yeah. Oh yeah. I remember. That's interesting. Jay Feely's our guest here on Sports Spectrum's podcast. Let me ask you about just the idea of that position that you play, being a kicker, and maybe the parallels of preparing as an NFL kicker to being a follower of Christ. It's sort of a two-ended question, maybe a little deeper than maybe you've ever been asked, but the parallels to going about the job that you do and the parallels to being a follower of Christ. What are they, in your opinion?
Well, I spoke about it a little bit, but the kicking position in particular, because teams are so fickle and they're so quick to pull the trigger and fire a guy if he struggles. Every day, every practice, every game, you walk in with the knowledge that if I don't do my best, then I might lose my job.
Yeah.
And so there's inherent pressure that I don't think it's a coincidence that the majority of kickers in the NFL have very strong faiths. That position in general, you go around and you talk to guys, you get to know guys around the league. 75% of the kickers on average are very strong Christians.
Yeah.
And I think it's because of having to deal with that pressure on a daily basis. If you're doing it on your own, then you're going to fail and you're going to fall and you're going to falter and you're not going to do your best. Whereas if you have someone that you can rely on and you have a greater picture in mind and you know that Christ understands where you are and where you're going to go and you can trust in him, that frees you from the results. And I think too much in life in general, we focus on the end result. We don't focus on the process. And we worry about results and we don't trust in God. I mean, I run into that with my kids, and as they grow up and they're becoming teenagers and going off to college and there's all these fears, and I sit down with my wife and I say, you know what, at the end of the day, God's in control. And whether we do a good job with our kids or we do a poor job as parents, that's not going to dictate what Christ does in their lives and who they become. And he's sovereign, and we have to be able to step back, because as parents, you want to control everything and you want to protect your kids and you want to keep them from harm and you want them to make the right decisions and you want to do everything as a parent to give them all the opportunity that they can have, the best opportunities. And yet at the end of the day, you have to step back and say, okay, you know what? It's not me who's impacting their life. It's Christ who's going to have the great impact, and he is in control, and I'm not dictating where they go in life. And the mistakes they make aren't necessarily a reflection on me, they're part of their journey in finding Christ. And you just have to point them in that direction and then trust God to have the right impact on them and to guide their steps. And, I think it's just every day you deal with that as a kicker, and every day you deal with that pressure. It's in your face every day. So it's given me the ability to be a better father and a better husband because I had to deal with that on a daily basis. And it's probably easier for me than it is for my wife to step back and to say, okay, God, I trust you, because I was the guy who had Saturday Night Live lampoon me, after a bad game when I was with the Giants, and they did the Jay Feely story called the long ride home. It was like 4 minutes of Dane Cook laughing at me and reveling in my worst game. And then you go out the next week and we're playing in Philadelphia and we go to overtime again and I got another game winner. And I go out and they call timeout to ice me and they play a montage of my misses on the Jumbotron during the timeout, And so you have to go out there and you have to perform in that moment with all that pressure and not allow it to distract you, not allow it to dictate the outcome, and say, okay, in that moment, God, I trust you and please fill me with peace. You talk about how real that peace that Paul talks about, you talk about it being, transcending all understanding. Well, there's no reason that I'm standing there in the middle of that field while they're making fun of me in the Jumbotron after I just went through the worst week professionally in my life, that I should have a peace. But I did. But I had a great peace. And then now looking back, the best thing that happened to me in my career was having that bad game at Seattle, was having Saturday Night Live do the spoof about me, was going through that moment on that field at Philadelphia, because from that moment on, I was a much better kicker, even numbers wise, than I was the 5 years before that, because I went through as bad a failure as you could go through and it didn't break you. And then it freed me from worrying about the results, and it really gave me a peace that I carried forward. I didn't miss another game winner the next 9 years of my career. And that's not like bragging and something that I did, but it was a change inside my heart and in my mind saying, okay, God, I can trust you even in the worst times. You're going to be there for me, and it allowed me, it freed me to play my best, and I think so many times in life, we're held captive by the fear of failure. Yeah. And when you can not fear failure, it allows you to go out there and do your best.
In not fearing failure, can you share maybe your favorite NFL moment as a player? Because I want to ask you about your favorite moment as a broadcaster too, because you've only been doing it a few years, but I think there's always great moments and opportunities that we accomplish in our lives that we think about and look back on. But on the field, as a player, as a kicker, is there a favorite moment that you can point to and say that was the one? That was the one.
Well, because of my struggle and being out of football for 2 years, and then all of a sudden it coming about so quickly and getting into camp and then winning a job and this whirlwind, all of a sudden you're in the NFL and you're really questioning at some point, do I belong? Am I good enough? Am I as good as all these other guys that are here? At the end of that year, at the end of my first year playing, we were playing Buffalo. It was December 23rd. It was my daughter's first birthday. They were at the game, and I kicked 4 field goals in the game. The last one was a 53-yarder in overtime to win it. It was my first game winner, and it was in overtime. It was a long kick, and everybody rushes out there. There's no greater feeling in sports than a walk-off where your whole team runs out there and picks you up and you celebrate. And I come off the field, and my wife hands me my daughter over the railing, and I have a picture to this day. She's getting ready in 2 weeks to go to college.
Oh, wow.
But I pulled out that picture the other day of her on her first birthday and me holding her on that field right there after that game winner. And, that kind of solidified my place in the NFL. I remember we went home. We were in this little 2-bedroom apartment in North Atlanta, and I went home that night and we're watching the highlights on ESPN, and Chris Berman does the highlight, and he says, "Jay, see me, touch me, Feely," and he gives me a nickname. And I look at my wife, I'm like, oh my God, Chris Berman just gave me a nickname. And it was just so surreal at that moment, and it was pretty cool. And that whole journey of faith and trusting God in that time when you're walking through the desert, those 2 years for me when nothing was happening, that was a really cool moment for me.
Now, what about as a broadcaster? Obviously, hopefully there's lots of great moments, I'm sure, that are ahead of you now being an analyst and being up in the booth. But what's been a cool highlight for you being able to do this broadcasting thing the last few years?
Well, I'll go back. My first year doing it, I was still playing actually, and CBS called me up, and they said, "Hey, you're not on a team right now. We're interested in you being an analyst. Do you have any desire to be an analyst?" And I hadn't really thought about it. I really kind of loved what I was doing, working once in a while on First Take and doing that role. And I kind of thought that's the path I would go down. And so they said, well, come to a game and try it. And so I went and I did this game. And I remember 5 minutes before I'm going on air to call this college game, I'm literally thinking to myself, I have no idea what I'm supposed to do for the next 3 hours. Like you're going to be live on air, and it's not like somebody sits down with you and walks you through it and tells you what to do and gives you this job description and says exactly. It's not like I go out there, okay, kick a field goal, kick between the uprights.
Right.
It's so subjective, and you don't know what success or failure really looks like. And so, to kind of jump into the deep end and just do it for a year and call games for a year and learn throughout that process was really cool. And then my first season was over, and I called my boss up, and it was in December, and I said, hey, I'm done calling college games. What about being on the sideline in the NFL? Like, I think I could really do that. And he talked to me for about an hour about how different the sideline role was from the analyst role and all this stuff. And at the end of the talk, I'm like, yeah, that doesn't scare me. Like, I can do that. And so he said, he goes, let me call you back. And so he called me back a day later. He's like, okay, I got you a game. It's the end of December. It's San Francisco, Cincinnati. Go ahead, go out there. So I went out, I did the game, and I was down on the sidelines, and a couple of plays happened. There was a blocked field goal, a couple of different things. And, they just threw it down for me as an analyst instead of a sideline reporter, kind of an analyst on the sidelines. And, they called me up the next week, and they said, hey, we kind of like that role. What do you think about doing that in the playoffs? And I said, all right, sure. And so they said, okay, well, we'll do the first playoff game, and we'll see how it goes. And so I did that game, and then I did the next playoff, and then they called me up the next week. They said, all right, you're on the AFC Championship, and that was Denver, New England.
Oh, yeah.
So I went and I did that game, and they called me up after the AFC Championship. They said, okay, you're on the Super Bowl. CBS had the Super Bowl that year.
Wow.
And so here I am. I'm doing games for my first year calling games, and I'm on the Super Bowl that year, which is just crazy and surreal. And you just kind of sit back and you say, okay, God, I thank you, and I trust you, and I see, your hand in this process, because it's certainly not anything that I did.
No, I mean, listen, that's pretty cool to have your Super Bowl moment be as a broadcaster too. I think obviously you would like to have that as a player, but that's a pretty cool thing to be working a game where, what is it, like 90 million or 100 million or some ridiculous number are watching, and that you have that moment. So are you freaked out at that point when you're doing the Super Bowl, or are you having that peace that you talked about?
Yeah, you know what? I had that peace,
That's
and it's just something that God has given me, definitely a blessing and something they put inside, my makeup to be able to be calm in those moments and to be able to trust him in those moments. And, that doesn't mean I'm perfect. Listen, I've been on Deadspin for things I've said. I've been on awful announcing. My kids love to mess with me. I messed up a call in one of the college games and it went viral, and my son just loves to kill me for it, And of course, of all things, it was a kicking play that I messed up too.
Oh, geez. Of course, right?
So, those things happen. And like I said, you can't fear failure, and you have to be able to get over those and not allow those to deter you. And for me, every failure I've had has always led to greater successes. So I kind of embrace them.
That's a good motto too. Every failure we have can lead to a greater success. Let me ask you this. If you're 43 now, so if an NFL team called you tomorrow and said, geez, we need you for a game, 45 yards for a couple of field goals, whatever it is, could you still do it, you think?
Yeah, if it was one game, absolutely.
So it's one game versus an entire year.
Yeah, I don't know if my body would hold up for an entire year. My son is a really good kicker now. He's a junior in high school, and he's one of the top kickers in the country. And every once in a while, he'll look at me and be like, okay, Dad, I can take you now. And I'll be like, all right, let's go. So we went out, a few months ago. He was kicking well and feeling himself. And so he told me that. So I said, you want to go first or you want me to go first? He's like, you go first. I said, all right, where are we kicking? And they gave me the parameters. And so I went out and I hit my 10 kicks and made all 10 kicks. And he looked at me. He's like, man, you should still be playing.
Well, kickers will kick till they're 46 or something like that, right? 47.
Right. I mean, look at Adam Vinatieri. I mean, the difference is that at some point I realized I didn't have a driver anymore, that I was teeing off with a 3-iron every time.
Sure.
That you hit the ball and you think, oh, I hit that one really well, especially on kickoffs. And all of a sudden the ball comes down like at the goal line, and they used to come down like 8 deep, and you realize, that you're not playing with the same set of clubs.
That's awesome. Jay Feely, thanks for being here, man. Last question I want to ask you. We ask to all of our guests here on the show. It's a easy question, sometimes not an easy answer. But right now, where God has you, what are you learning from him? What is the Lord teaching you in the season of life that you're in today?
Well, with an 18-year-old who's leaving to go to college, with a 16-year-old who thinks he's a man, a 13-year-old daughter who thinks that she's 20, and a 12-year-old, who wants to be right there with everybody else. He's certainly teaching my wife and I patience.
Oh yeah,
and trust. And like I said earlier, like as they go through life and they make those mistakes, and you want to protect them from making those mistakes. Yeah. And you want to get angry at them, and then you look at yourself and you want to blame yourself. And then at the same time, you have to sit back and say, okay, God, I trust you, and you're sovereign, and you helped me to get through the mistakes that I made in my life, and it didn't keep me from becoming the Christian that you wanted me to. And I say that to my wife all the time. I'm like, well, look at what you were doing at that age. Yeah. Yep. And she's like, yeah, but it's different, but no, it's not different. Just because they're our kids and we want to make sure that they don't make those mistakes. They have to go through those mistakes, and we have to give them grace and give them the freedom to make those mistakes, to then be able to come back and go back to Christ and understand that he gives a better path and a better way. I think that's the hardest thing I've ever been through, way harder than kicking or any TV broadcast or anything else, is just you trust him amidst those mistakes that your kids make, because you love them so much and you want to protect them and you want to keep them from making those mistakes. And you know what can happen, what those mistakes can lead to. Yeah. But at the same time, you have to give them the freedom to make those mistakes.
So the toughest part of any life, I think, is being a parent and allowing them to make those mistakes. So difficult. Jay Feely.
Yeah, and by the way, Jason, I just want him to say thank you. Like, I just want him to come and be like, you know what? You're right, Dad.
Right, exactly. Jay Feely, so good to talk to you, man. Thanks for being here. NFL season kicking off Sunday, September 8th. We'll be watching for you and just wish you nothing but the best. Let's do it again sometime. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Jason. I'm really proud of you and everything you've done. Love listening to your podcast, bud. You're doing a great job.
Thank you, my friend. Many thanks to Jay Feely for joining us here on Sports Spectrum. Love that dude. CBS Sports NFL analyst. Be watching for him. The NFL kicking off Sunday, September 8th, 2019. Jay will be a part of some games in the booth, and he'll also be on the sidelines doing some analyst work that way. It'll be a lot of fun to watch Jay Feely call a football game. He's really good, and it doesn't matter what position he played. He knows the game of football and does his homework. And he's a great dude. You heard his story. Love talking to him, and hopefully we'll get him back here on Sports Spectrum's podcast. He's on Twitter, and he's active on there, so give him a follow and let him know that you heard his story here on Sports Spectrum. Many thanks to Jay. Many thanks to our partners, Compassion International, the most trusted child development ministry in the world, releasing children from poverty, one child at a time, all done through the local church. And it's an opportunity for you and I to contribute $38 a month, tax-deductible, food, education, medical care, vocational training. That's what happens when you sponsor a child through Compassion, and it releases a child from poverty. It gives them hope, and it's all done in Jesus' name. Make a difference in a child's life by sponsoring them through Compassion International. Go to compassion.com/sportsspectrum, compassion.com/sportsspectrum, and consider releasing a child from poverty today. Reach us on our social media pages, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Give us a like over on our YouTube channel as well, and subscribe to our channel there. Lots of great content. And also email me directly, jason@sportsspectrum.com, with any comments, any feedback, any ideas for guests. Reach me directly, jason@sportsspectrum.com. And lastly, click that subscribe button on whatever app you're listening to this podcast on. Just click subscribe. You'll never miss an episode of Sports Spectrum's podcast. Thanks so much for listening. We love you guys. We'll see you next time with a new episode here on Sports Spectrum. Have a great rest of your day.